How did you convince the faculty to do this? Because there's a lot of questionable things in this. There's strippers, there's sexuality, there's blood and guts, there's a lot of violence.
There's allusions to rape.
Oh yeah, and it became no longer an illusion once I had that discussion.
How did you convince the faculty to give you the green light when all of these things are in there and you're showing these to a bunch of preteen or teenage adolescent kids?
Super hormonal, yeah, kids. So the answer is twofold. One is that I believe in an open door policy in my classroom. I very much would drop by anytime you'd like, and I have had some interesting drop-bys. I've had everything from, I teach on a college campus. I've had college faculty, just kind of like, listening in. And I've had administration. I've had people from the, we're owned by a regional education service coordinator. And we're run by, I don't say owned, like we're a business. We're owned, supervised by a regional education service coordinator, and the curriculum director would pop in. The person who I was the most really clear with this on was, of course, the principal, who I, was authorizing the purchase of these and the teaching of these, and the dean of students. She very much was like, I'm interested in, like the students, what's going on, like what they're reading, and like how you're teaching it. And she's like, I'm really interested in this comic idea. How is it that comics are high literature? Because that's one of the things that when I came into the school, I was very big.
Was that a sarcastic question, like when she asked that?
No, she was genuinely interested.
Okay.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, she was just, like, one of the things I touted when I came in was I was like, no matter where a student comes from, if you come at it with the right amount of conviction, a student will follow you. If you give them, the tools, they will be able to unpack things like Chaucer and Shakespeare. And I teach Chaucer and Shakespeare to these kids too. So she was like, I'm interested in knowing like how this is that. She's like, because in my mind that those seem totally different. And she's like, but I know you, and I know there's no way that they are totally different. And I said, no way, they're not. I said the same way in which Shakespeare's characters are not characters anymore, but people in our lives and in our cultural definition, the same is true of these characters. They are real people. And when we come at it with a critical mind, honestly, I'm a big advocate in teaching young adult literature and teaching comics. I think that my goal eventually is to have enough of a repertoire that I'm able to offer a comic for every unit, able to offer a young adult companion novel to every unit that I teach, because no matter how easy the writing may seem on the surface, the thoughts are there.
There's still deep stuff underneath.
It's deep. And there's deep things that you can do with it. And I showed her, I said, the only thing I have any concerns about, I was very upfront with her, I said, I opened the right to the panel.
The butt page.
The butt page.
Which page was that?
I think we called it.
Is it Charlene's book?
Yeah, we called this the butterfly page, I think, because I believe that's also the page where there's a butterfly. Isn't there a butterfly?
Hello. Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, she has a butterfly tattoo. So we were calling it in class the butterfly page because we're very witty and hormonal young teens.
Yes.
But I was very upfront with her, and I said, this is the only thing I'm concerned about. And she's like, oh yeah, I gotta say, my heart's racing right here. She's like, I can just think of reaction. I said, the key thing for me is context. If I were to hand this to them and say, read this, take it home and read it. Okay, A, they're not going to read it, but worse, B, they're going to find sensational things like this. And so we talked even about like the safety of our classroom and the safety of academic thought, and how when you're having an academic conversation, you can say an unpopular thing. You can say you understand an unpopular thing. And so I gave the example of, like how people have opinions on, very strong concepts of moral wrong and right. But if we step back and look at it from an evolutionary point of view, maybe it's not so wrong. And I said, but if we were to just have that conversation, well, we'd surely we'd seem pretty bad, wouldn't we? And they're like, yeah, no, we would. I said, but how do we go any further unless we have that conversation? And so we talked about taking risks. And taking risks intellectually is a key component that has been missing from, K-12 studies for a long time. We've been very much teach to the test and not about like being intellectually curious and going to the place that's awkward and the place that doesn't feel as good. And so we went there and I said to them, look, this is me trusting you to be adults. And they liked that. They really respected that I said, I'm trusting you to be an adult. I'm trusting you not to take your phone out and take a picture of this panel and blast it all over the, here and sundry just because you can. I said, I want to talk to you about this and I want to be able to offer you more of this. And not once. They've been dealing with these comics for 2 months now, and not once has any one of them ever breached that trust with me.
Wow. That's amazing.
So yeah, I'm really two students during this last week while they were writing their paper accidentally took them home, even though I've been very clear not to. And both times they came back to me very apologetic. They're like, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to, it just was in my bag. And I'm like, no, it's cool. Like obviously it's not like I'm stalking their pages, so I don't know if they did anything, but I really doubt that they did.
Wow.
And I'm not generally a trusting person.
I feel like the faculty would have been like, well, just look at it at face value and be like, yeah,
Well,
what?
there was talk about stickers.
Yes, I did.
You and I had a conversation. We were like, should we get some stickers to put over,
or like little FCC black,
black box stickers essentially,
like general redacted.
So yeah. So do you think that? So the administration seemed pretty receptive to it.
They seemed to understand that I was the front line, and that they were willing to trust me on that.
And you feel going forward that
they're letting me order all of those comics.
That's great.
I mean, Bloodshot. They didn't even bat an eye. I didn't even have to tell them what was in each thing. I mean, I was just like, they're all rated T+, which means 13 up, but all our students are, and they're like, oh no, I think it's good. And
they're just excited that their students are engaged?
They are very excited their students engaged. Furthermore, not to get like super technical and boring for you, but in teaching academia now, there's a lot of talk about finding the value in things that are easily accessible for students, as opposed to hitting them over the head with the classics, which I still want to do. I still want to shove the classics in their heads. Their head's going to be closed if I start with the classics. If I just say, here, I'm going to teach you two things. One, how to read something super difficult, and two, how to question something deeply, and I'm going to do it at the same time, they're just going to be on information overload, and they're going to break down. So using accessible text to bridge that gap has very much been a pedagogical shift that's occurred in the teaching of English studies at the high school level.
How are you going to react, or how would you have reacted if this subject matter was too mature for a student or for a student's parent?
For a student's parent, definitely face-to-face contact would have been my first. If a student had did not feel safe with me enough to say I'm feeling uncomfortable, and went home and said it to their parent instead, and that parent called up, all the numbers they could find for the school, guns blazing, the first reaction, and I feel very confident on this, whether they reached me on the phone the first time or the principal on the phone the first time, we're all going to have the same reaction. Let's come sit down and talk about this. Yeah. Because ultimately the reason I didn't go with the black box is you need to see how exposed Charlene is. And if I blocked that, all I would be doing is telling students that it's okay to ignore or block out the things that make us uncomfortable. And how can I say that to them when I'm asking them to do something uncomfortable by questioning everything around them, by asking them to think deeper? There could be students, parents who are very much concerned for the naivete of their child and not losing their innocence too soon. And for parents like that, you have to tread carefully. But overwhelmingly, by and large, these days, that's not, your average student's life. We have.
No, I think that students are much more mature than we give them credit for. And
Mm-hmm.
I think when we become
that's the problem.
Yeah, I think that when we become parents, we forget how mature we were at that age.
And more than that, even now, I think it's hard for parents of teenagers, to really take in how much their child is absorbing via, unregulated social media and, if that kid is even listening to the news. Sherman Alexie is the one who said it, you know, that if we take all the uncomfortable things out of all the books we ask our kids to read, all we're telling our kids is that the uncomfortable things in their life are wrong, and that they themselves then, or if they're having any uncomfortable or painful things in their lives, are less. And you know, so we hope if we glorify these canonical texts, we are taking away,
which have just as bad stuff in them,
right? But they're separated so much by elevated language and other things that a student really doesn't see it as a mirror so much as a window.
Yeah.
And books can be mirrors and windows.
I don't know.
But
nun.
What?
The nun. The nun in Chaucer. It's not necessarily
the wife
a window.
Of Bath.
Yeah, the wife
of
of Bath.
Bath.
I'm sorry. It's not necessarily a mirror for me, but I remember when I was that age.
Listen, that is I teach the Canterbury Tales, and Wife of Bath is a lot of people's favorites. So I can probably, you know, being the Miller, because they really like that he gets drunk a lot and beats things with his head. But Alexie says, you know, if we do that, then we're telling them that whatever is happening in their lives is something that they should be ignoring, and that seems absolutely counterintuitive to asking a student to think critically about everything in their life. So if a parent were to come down, that would be the discussion I'd have, and I'm not gonna throw the books at them, but I would come armed with a lot of best practice research that I've done. I don't make decisions in my classroom on a whim or with solely gut feeling. I do things from a place of best practice and from a place of research. And you know, that being said, I've also had it's a double-edged sword, the pain and pleasure of teaching high school parents, who by high school most of the parents are a little more hands-off, especially because I'm in an area, again, it's a regional magnet, but we service some very, very poor rural districts, and a couple of more urban centers. And because of that, many of the parents don't have the time to become heavily involved. I mean, even as we try and call to get them to help, you know, get some homework done or get a project turned in, as much as we hit voicemail constantly and we feel like it's a curse then, well, so too is it when you want to have, you know, when you want to stretch the bounds of a student's mind in your classroom and it's a little uncomfortable for them. Their parent who's not super helicoptery, you know, makes it so that they don't notice that their student is being, you know, stretched in an uncomfortable way. But they should be stretched in an uncomfortable way. That's not a bad thing.
Did you feel any of your students were too uncomfortable?
No. I mean, I have a student who he's very he blushes easily. You know, he's very much a pure soul, and for him that was a page he flipped very quickly through.
Yeah.
You know, but he never at any point did I get any indication from him that he was really like worked up about it. And I think most enjoyed the fact that it was, you know, it was showing her, we talked about the different ways that power manifests, and the same way that Charlene always had that power inside her, that fire was always there inside her. And in her personal life, she couldn't show it. She was in a position where it was kind of being, you know, contained inside her, with her relationship with Huxley. And so that power had to come out in some way. And we talked about how, you know, for the most part, we as a society view strippers as being, you know, taken advantage of and powerless. But when she's on that stage, and you see it because she says, "Don't look at me, don't look at me, don't look at me," when in the panels where she's walking to work and she's being beaten by Huxley, she says, "Don't look at me." And then the narration box says, "Okay, you can look at me now." And it's her on the stage. And we talked about how that power was always there inside her. You know, we talked about she was a latent...
You know, that's interesting. You're saying this, and it makes me think, like, is her power because of her personality, or is her personality because of her power? Like,
I would say the two are interchangeable.
yeah.
We talked about the metaphor of fire and what the symbol of fire stands for,
Yeah.
and how fire can be, you know, burn in love. It can be a positive thing, but it can also be hell. You know, and it can be the most negative thing. It can be those two major extremes, love and hate. Both are associated with a fire inside you. So we talked about all of that, and we talked about how
And all the kids are like that too. Like all of their powers are, they really mesh with their personality. And
yeah.
Which came first?
Well, they're latents, so one would assume they're interwoven completely. That there's no one without.
Like
the
if
other.
they had a different personality, or would they have had a different power?
Or if they had a different power, they'd probably have a different personality. I think the two grow together. And we talked about the flame and the correlation between the movement of a flame and the movement of dance, and how both are very sensual. So I could just go on and on for hours talking about that. Sorry.
What? What are you apologizing for?
I could keep going. So I'm going to
Oh.
stop. I'm going to stop because I could keep going on all the symbols we found. And
That's great.
it would take me probably about the same amount of time it took to teach the
And
first time.
your students found the symbol.
Sorry, it wasn't me. I mean, I provided some of them. I led to others, but they blew me out of the water with the way that they view. Again,
You took pictures of your smartboard, and
I took pictures.
We in preparation for this episode, we tried not to talk about the pictures, but I was very excited when you showed me what your students were getting from the text,
and that they were doing it in their own handwriting. It was on them. Like that whole idea of like the fall in love, and then the helicopter being there. That came from a student first, not from me. So that was the other thing, is that as the two different groups of students were reading it, I was making sure that one group's perceptions were being fed to the other group as well, so that they were getting a similar experience. But yeah, so like these are the things we talked about. So with the bleeding monk.
Did anyone connect him to Jesus?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
Take it.
They were like, he's bleeding from the same areas as Jesus, and I was like, well, he's bleeding from his torso, and Jesus was tortured. Okay, sure. My classroom,
you know what you should have done? You should have had them listen to minute 16 of the Valiant Effort podcast.
That's awesome.
But so in my classroom, anything that they come up with that has evidence is fine by me. I do not think that I have a privileged place just because of my own.
Yeah.
And something that I always felt myself in the classroom.
With your permission, maybe we'll put some of these blackboard pictures up on.
So they saw fire as freedom fire, for instance, and they had all these other things that they were talking about. This is different ways that the author's craft comes out. There's more as we get.
That's a lot.
Yeah, like I said, there could be more, and I have to go further and further back in my classroom to take pictures of the board.
Symphony of Destruction, Megadeth.
That is it. There you go. That is the one they decided. By the way, Symphony of Destruction. I'm glad it was in the notes. We found it.
I don't know Megadeth.
But we kept things a running list going in their notes and on our boards of the artist craft being the pictures that tell us about their character, and then things that they say, our author's craft, the words, the narration or stuff. Sea of Woe, I have got to give it to my girl. I'm not gonna obviously use her name, but she was like, well, he goes to Torkala when he's feeling particularly down. So the Sea of Woe is the sea of his tears. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. The Sea of Woe is his tears. And he's so down on himself that he travels through the tears metaphorically into this other place. So,
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
That's a pretty in-depth look of the Sea of Woe there.
Mm-hmm.
But it totally makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those things where, like, if we talk to Dice Art, maybe that was intentional, or maybe we're just pulling a Shakespeare on him and applying genius to him. And hey, Dice Art, just tell him you did it on purpose. But I mean, this goes on day after day.
Did you just take pictures every day?
Yeah, pretty much every day that they. Now in their notebooks, it just keeps going, and I have this then now transcribed into a spreadsheet. I just kept it all in Excel spreadsheet, so that I had all of this data from this first time.
Valiant asked for
some artifacts too.
For some feedback, and
Oh, did they?
yeah, and I'm curious about how those interactions are going to go.
Yeah.
What would Valiant do with your feedback?
The first thing they asked for was my curriculum. So I turned over my curriculum of what the unit was about and how it was going to be done. I'm almost egotistical in my ability to write curriculum. I will gladly share it with everyone. So they're interested in how this comic is being used and in how they can help to support further academic use of their comics.
I've seen an effort on their part to get their books into libraries. So maybe this is something that they can show. Adam, who's helped, he's marketing manager, I think.
He's sales.
That's right.
Marketing is Hunter.
Right. So that's right. So maybe he can use this information to help get books in libraries and such. So.
Do you foresee seeing like a boom in more schools, maybe possibly doing something like this because of this?
I would love to see that. That's something that I've been toying around with myself about doing. I go to these conventions, these like teaching conventions, and these school conferences, and there's always a panel or two on the use of graphic novels in your room, but never one that, as of yet, that I've attended anyway, where like they've really sold graphic novels as like the thing you need to get into your classroom.
What they're doing is they're selling their particular graphic novel.
It's one, it's a panel of authors each saying, this is how you can use mine. But what I really want to see is a panel of teachers showing you, dude, these are gold. You need to get these into your classroom. You need to use them as gateways. I
really think the trend is going that. I remember my dad teaching mouse to his college students, and I was like, oh, that is the coolest thing. That you're teaching a graphic novel to your students. That's amazing. I can't wait for college. And I think it's great that you're doing it at the high school level and you're engaging students. I certainly know that I would have really liked that in high school if I got a chance to read graphic novels. And maybe if some of my peers had gotten to read graphic novels, I wouldn't have been the only one who read comics. And maybe Nick would have read the original Valiant universe by now.
I think that that's something that I
get Ivar the Time Walker over here. He'll bring us back. and maybe and Karyn will come too. Therefore,
why not?
Yeah, and convince everybody that needs to happen, and therefore we will have that done.
But I'm very much an advocate of and again, not just getting the tomes, not just Mouse belongs. Yes, Mouse needs to be there. Watchmen needs to be there. These are amazing works. Persepolis needs to be in classrooms, absolutely. But let's not forget the comics, like the comics that are there's a place for superheroes. There is a place for the stories of these people in the classroom, and in particular in any classroom, and according to the Common Core, that's most of the classrooms that should be talking about craft, about the way that we create character, we create anything or develop anything over the course of a story.
It's also the only. It's really one of the few literary forms that is committee.
Yes.
It's not just the writer; it's the artist.
And we talked about the different artists, and how the different artists indicated, how our who we are as a person is not based on how we look, because faith is still faith regardless of how she's drawn. And so we talked about that too.
The story is that Livewire was created as a throwaway character by Dysart in the first volume, and then when he saw how Kari Evans drew her and the costume that she put her in, he says, well, I got to use her a lot more. And now, as we just discussed in episode 24, she's becoming a major player in the universe. So it certainly is lots of people's ideas into one thing, and that is unique. I mean, novels are one person and one editor. So.
Mm-hmm. And so this is another one that, again, I didn't notice when I read. It didn't occur to me as a major shift about who Chris was as a character and how she's actually changed. As another student picked up on it. So Chris, when she first meets Charlene, very antagonistic with her, very like snarky, oh, there goes the whole, stripping her way through college thing, right? And then they're at a diner before they go to find Torque, and they're still, they're like, I would like to like you, except just a pain in the ass, and then we notice a shift. I didn't notice. Another student didn't notice that there's a shift in the way she treats Charlene when they are escaping the airplane at the end of the last issue in the series. Chris says to Charlene, do you understand the principles of Newton's third law? And she's like, you kidding me? And she just goes with it. And so we talked about, because a good chunk of my students did not know Newton's third law. An object in motion will stay in motion. And
arrows.
And unless it meets, opposite force. And rather than what?
I messed up on the final part 2 of that. No. Like you did the same thing.
Yeah, it's equal and or greater.
What I remember saying is I was like, something keeps going unless it meets something. It keeps it from going.
We talked about this in the Perfect Day.
Sounds wonderful. Whatever. Anyway, it was brought to me by a student.
Yeah.
And she was like, she's clearly showing here she doesn't think of Charlene as a dumb stripper anymore, because she didn't. She didn't talk down to her. She didn't explain to her what to do. She said, "Do you know Newton's third law?" And then they jumped from the plane. So it shows a change in their relationship and how Chris has matured because she is no longer feeling as defensive, because it comes down to her inadequacies. That's why she was talking to Charlene that way before. So it's things like that where, it's one little line. And when you're reading a big book, maybe one little line like that doesn't get noticed. But when it's seen up against the way that the characters are drawn, their facial expressions as they're looking at each other, that's when they notice it. Because maybe they're drawn by, oh, hey, why are Chris and Charlene looking at each other, like with this connection moment? Why are they looking at each other like that? Oh, look, this is what's being said. And it kind of, it rolls out from there.
Do you think you made a connection with your students?
Yes, absolutely. I do think that not only did I make a connection with them on a facilitator to intellectual level, but I think that even more than that, I think that there are students in my classroom who had never read a comic before, had never thought of themselves as a critical thinker or capable of reading before, and have found a medium that they enjoy and that they will pursue on a leisure level. But probably never be able to abandon the thinking critically portion of it. That's ideally. Cool.
So what are your future plans then?
Well, I teach this course 2 more times. So this year, I have another round of them coming up. Again, I'm in a block semester schedule. So I leave this group behind at the end of January and pick up another crew, another 2 classes full of students. And my plan is, this unit felt very solid to me, and I will do this again. I will be entering the identity unit via Harbinger Renegades, and then move on to Lit Circles.
Oh yeah. So are you gonna teach this one again for the semester? Or are you gonna keep going on with like Bloodshot?
I'm gonna teach this one again. This is the one that I'm gonna stick with for the teaching, and then I'm going to have. Because by next semester they'll be in, I will have the whole rest of that universe sitting on my shelf in my room. Now, to be fair, we share a library with the college, and our librarian for the college was like really supportive of me, and he was like, I'll order these. He's like, I'll order all of them, and we can have them in the college library. And I'm like, well, that's awesome. You should definitely do that. But I'm also getting a class set. And part of that is, they're good and they're going to go off the shelves. And with these students, sometimes it's about striking while the iron's hot and just getting them, hooked, and they tend to gobble it up and keep going before they realize that they've kept going.
So you pretty much think that the students that complete this class are going to continue on with their just reading, just buy them on their own?
I wouldn't say all of them. I would say that I probably had a good solid quarter who were already avid readers to begin with. I have some who have been handing me book selections. I've gotten ripped pieces of notepaper with titles on them that say, read this, I think that this would really go with this unit. You know, like, I was reading this and I was also thinking about this thing that you're teaching and I think that you could probably use it. I'm like, all right, give it to me, I'll get it. And then just this morning, student who has been having a lot of trouble adjusting to high school, you know, a couple other emotional upheavals have happened in her life, and she's been having some serious issues getting into academia again in 9th grade. She just randomly came up to me this morning, handed me a book, and she's just like, this is a good book about communicating how you feel, and it's made of poems. And so I was thinking that, you know, you might like to read these poems, and maybe, you know, we could talk about the poems too in our upcoming unit about choices. So all she knows is that we're going to start a unit on Monday about choices, and she already had this book on hand that she wanted to then share. So I'll read that this weekend, and I will probably pick out a poem or two to use, just because she's gonna feel really good. It's gonna it's gonna, you know, buoy her into it, particularly because that class voted they want to read Oedipus Rex.
Cool.
Together as a class.
That's a great story.
They were given the choice of the units because we're running out of time, so I had to choose between units, and they got to choose between fate, free will, and choice, so the effects of choices on our lives, and or social justice. And they chose fate, free will, and chance. And then I asked them if they wanted to read, you know, which book they wanted to read, and overwhelmingly they all chose Oedipus Rex. So we're going to start together all reading Oedipus Rex, and then we'll go on, and some of them will go on to Romeo and Juliet, and others will go on to Fault in Our Stars. Next semester, I'm going to work harder to try to contact Joshua Dysart. I tried, but I was kind of buried in a lot of other tasks that I had to do at that point in the semester, and I wasn't able to get in contact with him.
Your students made some questions?
My students wrote questions. If they were to, you know, talk to Joshua Dysart, what would they ask? And a lot of, you know, some of them were kind of silly. They were like, you know, what songs do you listen to while you're writing? You know, the standard stuff.
You know, that's not really a silly question. Like,
there are
well, you know, that big thick Hawkeye trade that I got has David Aha's playlist in the back of it, and it's kind of neat to see, you know, what an artist is thinking about when they're crafting, you know.
But a lot of them had interesting questions about the decisions that were made about the characters and how the character story were going to be developed and why they chose to do it in this sequence and things like that. And they asked me for like a good solid 2 weeks as we were finishing this and then moving into the next one. They kept asking, you know, like, are we going to be able to interview him? Are we going to be able to interview him? You know, because I had said I'm going to do my best, try and contact him, see if we can, even if it's just, you know, I mean, an ideal would be if I could get a hold of him and we could arrange a Skype interview, and the whole class could, you know, decide which questions they want to ask, and the spokespeople could ask him the questions, and we could have that whole thing on Skype where they have that interaction with a person who's making that decision, that craft. And then worst case scenario, if he would just, you know, answer the questions via email, would be great, you know, type of thing. I didn't do that as stridently as I really wished I had. I wish I'd contacted Valiant back and been like, hey, can you help me here? Like, because I just tried through his website and he didn't respond. And I think that's something that, if I am successful in that next semester, I would invite these students back to that conversation. I think that's something that they very much were interested in doing, is being able to pick an author's brain, and in their mind, an important author, a big author. You know, you always have these local authors who are willing to talk to students about the choices they made, but then they're talking about a book that the kid is like just been forced to read because you know this interview was coming up. Whereas they want to ask him these questions. They're interested in knowing how he did and why he did what he did.
So here's just a fun question. What would be your second choice in the Valiant universe of a book to teach?
I think that there are a lot of interesting commentaries in Archer and Armstrong that could be pulled, not so much, I mean, yes, definitely in my class, I'm an English teacher, but that's one where I'm trying to kind of cajole that into our social studies curriculum. I would love to see, you know, they are very pointed in some of their story arcs in Archer and Armstrong with things that are going on in the world. And I think that would be a good gateway for having that current events conversation. I'd love to be able to say, pull Quantum and Woody in and talk about race issues and the ways in which they're playing with race issues in that. And so those are ones where I can definitely see the themes in them. But I do think that they would be really strong in social studies. I could see talking about voodoo mythology and talking about the value
it's
of.
Not very deep.
I'm aware. It would be a gateway into a deeper discussion about voodoo mythology.
I think that would be a stretch to teach Saddleman. Yeah.
And then I think you could definitely talk about the place and history of Eric and the ways in which we look at what's right and wrong in our world and in the way we interact with people. Like he comes back and to him it's very cut and dry. Like this was our land before, it's our land now. I'm like, that's Romania and you can't do that.
We just had this conversation.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, we did.
And I think that again would be a really interesting conversation to have. I could see possibly throwing something like Bloodshot into. I have a unit in 12th grade on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and I'm expanding that. It's also going to include starting next semester.
I never really thought of him as the Frankenstein monster, but he kind of is.
But he is. And
especially the Zero issue where it's the argument over whether he has a soul or not.
Not even that. So the way I approach Frankenstein, and I'm adding in Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park into it as well, starting next semester. And I said in my meeting this morning that I was going to pick at least one more book for it, and it may be Bloodshot. Is that just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. So they figure out this nanite technology. We're capable of it. But is it ethically right to do so? Is it ethically right to, take these soldiers and do, this experiment on them and what are the ramifications for his use and his rights? We have a discussion in Frankenstein over sentience. What makes something so smart or so human-like that it then deserves rights? And so, we talked about AI. And again, just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it. I mean, we can manipulate genes and make designer babies, and again, is that really something that we should be exploring, or should we be questioning that?
You could also talk about free will too on that one. If does he really have free will or not? Because there's only one moment where he's flying up in the air and he's like, I'm free. Mm-hmm. That's like the only time when he really feels free. So that would be an interesting discussion too.
Mm-hmm. And just the future of our technology. So the nanites heal him, which on the surface seems like a really awesome thing. Like, why don't we all have nanites inside us healing everything, right? But he can't die, and he's a slave to that. Yeah. Just as Frankenstein's creature is a slave to the processes, of his body and of his mind that Frankenstein, created and then abandoned. And just like Frankenstein again, I go into Paradise Lost in that, and how the creature really associates with Satan and his rebellion. Mm-hmm. Well, what is Bloodshot if not rebelling against his creators right now, doing the same thing that Satan is kicked out of heaven for? So the most likely one that will end up in one of my classes is probably Bloodshot, which I think my husband might find pretty shocking, given that I don't generally like.
It's not your favorite.
No, it is not. It's not. It's on the top of my must-read pile. But I can't think of one that couldn't be used. I mean, full disclosure, I'm not a huge fan of Shadow Man. I personally wouldn't want to use it in a classroom, but I could see why another might use it as a launching pad to have a discussion about justice, or have a discussion about, voodoo mythology or something like that. But I mean, I think that all of them have the opportunity to go somewhere big. They have it in there. Valiant is a company that's not just putting out, the Harlequin equivalent, so Harlequin is formula fiction. It's, very quickly produced, very similar storyline romances. And there are comic book publishers who have those types of things. Valiant is not one of them, I don't think. I think that they really pay attention to craft, and they really value good writing, not just a story that's going to sell, but a story that's going to say something big. And I gave kudos big time to Joshua Dysart in Death of a Renegade for that kind of stuff. I think that he
Careful.
I know. I think that the way that was written was just that was great literature.
It's amazing.
The fact, just the way it was written, that that offered a very deep read for that.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap this conversation up. This has been a very illuminating conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
I am the queen of information, though. Ask one question, and I will provide about 70 answers.
I think we need to have you on more often.
You never have to talk.
So,
I got a sore throat today. I'm going to bring in Karyn.
I have a sore throat, and I still just talk like this. I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to be done, and then I'm going to have a big old thing of tea.
So, tell us what you guys thought of this conversation. I'm actually really curious to hear what you think about it, and you can tell us by emailing us vepodcast@gmail.com or on Twitter @vepodcast. What's our website, Nick?
I don't know.
vepodcast.wordpress.
vepodcast.wordpress.com.
That's right. We're gonna show some of the stuff that some of her students did.
All anonymous.
All anonymous.
I promise that I understand
and
teacher ethics.
and some of the Blackboard stuff, and you kind of can get an inside peek on how she taught this class. So thank you guys very much for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.
Sayonara.
Adios.
Ciao.
I did enjoy reading the Harbinger Renegades. I enjoyed it because it was the first comic I ever read, and I really enjoyed it. I had never read comics before. This was my first one. My favorite part of the Identity Unit was how we got to see how the different characters were with each other. I would recommend teaching using comics because it is a cool way to learn, and I think it was cool, especially for me being my first time. I enjoyed it a lot.
Did I enjoy Harbinger Renegades? I, in general, enjoyed Harbinger Renegades. It's like one of my first comic books I enjoyed. Or, if it's a graphic novel, I guess you consider that. I enjoyed it pretty much. Why or why not? I enjoyed it because of the characters were very unique, and it was very detailed compared to other comic books I've looked at. I have read, I think, a couple of comic books before, a little bit of Batman and Flash, but nothing like this comic book. My favorite part of the Identity Unit was probably when we were reading the book, and we were introduced to this character called Torque. Torque was awesome, and I think he was the best character in the book. And I would really recommend teaching this book or this comic to others because it's really unique. It gets there's a lot of detail in the book. The characters are all very interesting, and I think it's really good for young adults. And I think that's all I have to say.